Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you're enjoying the content, please drop us up, drop a like, and let us know your thoughts below in the comments. Also, please consider supporting our podcast via the link below. It really helps us out. Dave, welcome to the World XP podcast. How are you, sir?
Great, Eric. I appreciate the invitation and looking forward to chatting with you for a while.
Yeah, for sure. So, let's real quickly do a quick intro, who you are and what you're up to, and then I guess specifically why you're here today. And then we'll have the question from the previous guests, and then we'll hop into all of the things that we need to talk about.
Well, you found me and invited me, so that was I appreciate that. My name's Dave Kennedy, and I am a candidate for the United States Congress, the House of Representatives. That's District 8, Congressional District 8, which covers Arlington, Alexandria, Falls Church, and parts of Fairfax County. For the most part, inside the Beltway. It goes a little south of the Beltway at the end there, but pretty much inside the Beltway.
Very nice. So the question from the last guest is, who is your hero or idol, or maybe more broadly, somebody that you looked up to, maybe growing up or even now?
You know, boy, that question, I think it changes depending on where you are in life. But actually, I lost both my parents in the last 4 years. My dad passed in 2020 during the COVID pandemic, and he was in a nursing home at the time. And once a nursing home gets COVID, it just rampaged through. Then my mom passed away in March of 2023. And I would say, I again, I probably wouldn't have said they're my heroes 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I would have just probably not gone there, but I think about them a lot now, and I realize how instrumental they both were in my life. I miss them a lot. And I can say, yes, they are two of my heroes.
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
So I want to start off with why you're running for Congress, but I want to add into the question why you chose to go as an independent. And the reason specifically what I'm getting at is lots of people, I think, are not very happy with the two-party system at the moment. But there's also an inherent difficulty in running as a third party. So you can still have similar ideas or the same ideas, and you can try and get on the ticket for one of those parties and maybe try and influence that way. So what led you to even, like, where did the idea come from in the first place? Like, was there one thing that sparked it, and then what kind of carved out the path that you've chosen in terms of your campaign and how you chose to run?
Yeah, no, I can really point to my decision first to explore and then to actually run. And that goes back to May of 2023, a little more than a year ago. And I just graduated from seminary. I was at Wesley Theological Seminary from 2018 till my graduation in 2023. And I just, I still was working full time with my long-term employer. We're an organization that does advocacy for colleges and universities. So I still sat in that job, but I graduated seminary and I said, I want to go into ministry. I want to go into the nonprofit world. I want to do something around justice. And knowing that I was going to retire from my day job in the near future. And, Eric, I just said, what about running for Congress? And I think there is a justice social ministry element to that. And I started researching it and looking at what you need to do to run for Congress, the whole process with both the Virginia Department of Elections as well as the federal elections. And the more I looked at, the more I said it's doable. And once I hit January 2nd of this year, I was ready to go and start collecting signatures. And I guess the rest is history. as far as running as an independent, um, well, that's actually one of the reasons and I think like a lot of us, and you kind of even alluded to it, it's just so darn frustrating listening to the news, the cable news, to be honest. Local news I think, is a whole different story, but cable news is all about choosing your channel. Is it going to be an MSNBC or CNN or Fox News? Um, and then once you're on that side, you're kind of initiated into the tribe, so to say. And then when you meet people who might have a different perspectives on issues, I think we've just been programmed to kind of almost judge people on where they stand politically. And I don't think that's how we were wired. I don't think that's what we're meant to be, as just compassionate people. And I think we are a compassionate people. And so choosing D versus R, I just didn't want to do it. And I said, you know what, if I'm going to do this run for Congress, I'm going to do it as an independent, and I'm going to approach everybody with respect and meet them where they are. And you know what, if we don't agree on issues, and chances are anybody you meet, you're not going to agree on every issue no matter what. So and that's okay. We're all wired differently, and you and I might agree on these 10 issues and disagree on 5 others, but we absolutely can work together.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything that you said at all. I would add, given the choice to run as an independent, what is the strategy to challenge the kind of the incumbents, or the incumbent and his challenger from the other party?
So yeah, so our district has been represented by Don Beyer
Right.
for he is 5 terms now. I believe he's in his 5th term right now.
Hmm.
And we're a very blue district, probably about, looking at the last 2 um, election cycles, probably about 75% of the vote he gained. He's being challenged by Republican Jerry Torres,
Hmm.
another independent, and then myself. And part of the strategy is not being beheld to party, and being able to um, vote conscience, being able to and this is I can't attest to how true this is, but I have heard, if you don't vote the party line, you're going to get a lot of pressure from the party leaders to vote the party line. And again, I think sometimes it may or may not be the will of your constituents. And as again, I have no I try not to hide anything about myself. I'm my platform is really 3-pronged, and I shouldn't call this isn't my issues platform. I'd call it my umbrella. My umbrella is, and what drives everything that how I think about policy is: number 1, love neighbor; number 2, respect differences; and number 3, challenge bullies. And I think if looking at policy from that lens, I believe can lead to good policy, and all can also lead to a lot of bipartisan policy across the aisle.
Yeah. So if you were to, well, I'm a voter in your district. What's the pitch? Why should I vote for you and not somebody else? And you don't and or yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Well,
Why should people listening vote for you in
I just
this election?
yeah. Well, I say again. I'll start with what I said at the beginning. I think the 2 major parties are forcing us to choose sides, and ultimately forcing us to be enemies. And I don't think that's, again, I said before, I don't think that's how we're wired. So that's my first pitch. My second pitch is, um, I'm just focused on bread and butter quality of life issues like safe streets, um, dignity of a job, which to me ties back to affordability of housing and healthcare, having a living wage, issues like supporting teachers and parents and libraries. And I call it our secret sauce of education in this country. We're not at our secret sauce has so much potential, though we lag behind other industrialized country when it comes to science and technology and engineering and mathematics, the STEM. But I still think we do have this secret sauce of teachers and parents working together. And then our libraries. I love our libraries. I'm from Arlington. I love the library system in Arlington. I primarily have used that library system, but I will visit libraries in other parts of the district. That's one thing that I want to do just over the next 3 months is visit everyone, everywhere that I possibly can.
You mentioned affordable housing. Couldn't agree more. Um, Rents and mortgages and stuff have gone up. There's not a lot of housing inventory for people who want to buy houses. Um, and I've got friends that are struggling slightly with rent went up and all these other things. What's the idea b behind that? Or like what sort of ideas do you have to solve that problem? And I asked that question and I'll caveat with I know a lot of these things are interrelated and it's very hard to get, yes, this is my one-stop solution for now all of a sudden housing is affordable. Like it doesn't work that way. But what are some ideas that you have that could help manage or mitigate that problem?
Well, once upon a time in another lifetime, I was a college student and my undergraduate degree was economics. And, in some ways, it's really simple. It's about supply and demand. I mean, housing prices are going to be high when supply is this and demand is that. I mean, that's a reality. So we need to build more housing. We need to increase the supply and demand. Is the demand still going to be, we're not going to temper the demand, especially in this area of the country. I mean, we're probably in the top five, if not the top three, of most expensive housing in the entire country. Um, what we and what ends up happening is the public servants, the police, the teachers, um, those who those who should be living in our communities become the ones who are priced out. Now, I know it's controversial. Arlington had a big initiative that passed through the county board last year. They called the missing middle. I don't know if that, because I know you're not in Arlington, Eric, but it
Hmm.
was huge around here. And when I went door to door and was getting my signatures, I shouldn't say I asked, lots of people asked me what I felt about missing middle. And what missing middle basically did was it said in any neighborhood, North Arlington, which is a lot of single family homes, or other parts of Arlington, when a property becomes vacant, we can build, we can zone this lot for a six flat. So where it became really controversial was in some of these single family neighborhoods that said they just said we don't want this. My family bought a house in this neighborhood, a single family residential neighborhood, and now if my neighbor moves out and a developer purchases the lot, they can build a six flat. So you can see why that would be controversial. Now, when people ask me about what I thought about missing middle, I said, you know what, it probably needed to be more targeted. I mean, the concept is good because we're going to increase supply. But on the other hand, um, it needs to be targeted with a little more fine-tooth comb to areas that already maybe have more of a multi-residential type feel to it. To go into a single family neighborhood and build a six flat, I don't know. They're just something that, I can think if my family was in a neighborhood like that, and then I had a six flat on both sides of my house. I don't know. I probably wouldn't be that happy. I don't think a lot of people would be that happy, but I do think more selective zoning around where six flats can be built would have been helpful with the missing middle initiative. I also say I have a friend, now he's in the district. He is a deacon in the Methodist Church, and he has been really active in housing. And what he has led in the district and in some neighborhoods just outside the district is a program of converting underutilized churches into affordable housing. And he's worked with at least a dozen churches in that context. And it's actually happened in Arlington as well. There is, I think it is a Methodist church that's on the corner of, I believe it's Fairfax and Stafford, right by the Boston Metro station,
Mm-hmm.
where that was a church. And I watched it because I always take that metro into the city. But that, what they've done is they preserved the church on the first floor and they built affordable housing above it. And so those are creative solutions that again are going to get to the supply issue.
How does that relate to U.S. Congress, right? We spent that was an Arlington initiative that was passed,
Mhm.
and again, don't disagree with anything that you said. It makes sense, right? Supply and demand issue, completely with you there. Then the next, for me at least, and the follow-up question is, okay, well, why U.S. Congress rather than Arlington Board of whatever,
Yeah.
or I don't know what their governing body is, because I don't live there, but why U.S. Like how would you envision your position within the U.S. Congress helping the eighth district with that problem
Yeah.
as an example?
Well, again, if it's about supply and if it's about building, then I think there's got to be for developers that build affordable housing, tax credits, um, or incentivize that kind of building. Developers probably want to build big structures that have, units that can be leased for, I don't know, $3,000 a month. That's not affordable housing. But I think with tax incentives and some possibly in earmarking units in some of these developments as affordable units. I mean, that's something that actually can come at the federal level. I also, when we look at affordable housing, we're looking, there's different tiers to it. There's um, the let's call kind of using that term again that Arlington County used, the missing middle. So, you have the professionals, the public servants, the police, the teachers, and making affordable housing in the communities they work in. But then when you talk about housing, also I think you have to look at the unhoused and folks who are homeless, and you know, the lowest income individuals. I think the Section 8 voucher program needs to be healthy so that, um, again, individuals who are lower income are able to have opportunities to also be housed in not just affordable housing, quality affordable housing.
That makes sense. Where do you stand on, like, philosophically, the role of government into these things? Because I want to jump a little bit into education. And I've heard some people say that, oh, we should get rid of the Department of Education because it should be the local school boards or the local kind of bodies that work with like the parents, with the teachers, the secret sauce, like you mentioned earlier, and there shouldn't be some federal unelected body that is kind of in charge of what some kid in Iowa or what some kid in the 8th district of Virginia um needs. Where do you stand kind of philosophically on government, and then using education as the example, feel free to jump into your thoughts on education and teachers like you mentioned before.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I have, when I got out of college, this was 1985. I was looking for work, and at that time I lived in New Jersey, and I had a friend whose mother was a teacher in the New York City public schools. And it was like, this must have been August of 85. And, I didn't have anything set yet. And she goes, New York City Board of Education has a significant teachers shortage and they're looking for teachers. She was a teacher in the New York City public school system. And I went into Brooklyn one day, which is where the Board of Education is located, and basically applied for a temporary teacher's license and ended up teaching in New York City, up in actually in Harlem for 2 years. And I was a junior high school mathematics teacher. So I've always had a passion for education. I loved those kids. They challenged me, but it was really it inspired me and probably influenced a lot of directions I ended up taking in my life. Um, I guess why I say that is, like you had said, our schools are basically funded by property tax, which means, more well-to-do neighborhoods have resources. Um, and then I look at, again, kind of going back to my days in the 2 years I taught in New York City. Um, those schools were just under resourced, and so they schools. I believe, so we're not gonna this whole, the secret sauce is a lot of different elements. We need to fund. I mean, again, our whole foundation is funding locally, and locally means parents decide locally. Parents become part because their tax dollars are funding the schools. They are part of the secret sauce. They're part of the formulation of education in that community, in those communities. Same goes with inner city schools, but again, when they're under resourced, um, and when they're dealing with a lot of other issues like nutrition, all of a sudden the school has to be responsible for making sure the kids get a good meal. All of a sudden, they are become more resource intensive. They need additional resources, and for those schools to be funded through federal programs or whatever type of additional subsidy that might be needed to give those kids the same opportunity, I totally support that. So, I mean, the mix, and then you look at, states also, and the states are also a part of the funding mix, and but it varies from state to state what percentage of state budgets fund local education. So there's always gonna be a variation, from state to state, from locality to locality. But the bottom line is, we need to have the best teachers in we number one, we need to just have the best teachers. So our colleges and universities just need to keep doing what they're doing and getting young people into this field. It does kind of all intertwine. Why do I want to be a teacher? I have a passion for kids, But I also then it feeds into our previous discussion about affordability. Am I going to be able to actually be a teacher and also raise a family, or just have a lifestyle that's solid middle class and above? So we need to fund teachers. We need teachers with good salaries. We need to incentivize people to go into teaching. And then which means again, that's where the funding comes in. We have to pay teachers. So whether they're teaching at a suburban school or a rural school or a inner city school, we've got to take care of our teachers.
I couldn't agree more. I think teachers are probably one of the most undervalued. Um, it's one of the most undervalued professions salary wise, right? In terms of if you're talking monetary compensation, they do not get paid what I think that they should get paid. Um, with that said, though, if it's coming from government funding, whether it's federal or states or whatever, oftentimes the money would then it would come from somewhere else. So, like, where in your like, what's the idea for that? Like, where would you? So on your website, you have a whether learning happens in public, private, or homeschool, all of our children deserve the best education possible. Couldn't agree more. Where where does that shift come from, right? So we pay a certain amount in taxes, certain amount goes to Department of Education, right? Talking at the federal level, because that's what you're running for. So for the people listening, I'm talking federally because
Yeah.
that's what Dave is running for. So certain amount goes to Department of Education, and we've got Department of Commerce, and we've got State Department, and all of these different departments, Department of Energy, all of these departments and agencies that are run by cabinet appointees and other types. Um, how where is that kind of, and obviously we don't have to go line by line because that's ridiculous and neither of us I think know all of them off the top of our head. But like what sorts of things would you be prioritizing or I guess deprioritizing to increase the priority on education?
Yeah. Well, this is I love these conversations because I have to think on the spot sometimes. But I am coming back to um, incentivizing teachers, and we could actually connect this to the whole student debt issue.
Hmm? Sure.
And I think programs, and these actually could be federal programs. I know there's probably some state programs as well that could support this, but programs that do forgive student debt if you commit to 5 years of teaching, 10 years of teaching, whatever it is, in a maybe an underserved public school. I mean, I think that could be, you know, call it the two birds with one stone. You're addressing the student debt issue. So teachers who are coming out of whatever um, college or university, and again, carrying that big student debt that we read about a lot over the last few years. And you're also by committing to an underserved public school, um, to forgive some of that debt by making that commitment. I think that would be actually a federal program that, and there's probably some precedent for those types of programs. I'll be honest, I don't know. I couldn't point to a federal program right now that does that. But if we're not doing it, we should be doing it. And if we're doing it, we should be doing more of it.
Hmm. Is there any merit to the idea that the student debt problem is caused, at least in part, by the fact that these loans are federally backed and that you can't declare bankruptcy from from a student loan? So what I'm getting at is the price can be artificially inflated because the government is willing to back the loans that they're giving to the students who are then paying to the colleges and the
Mm-hmm.
universities. And so if that was not the case and more kids were defaulting on the loans or declaring bankruptcy off the loans, the prices couldn't be that high because the schools wouldn't get that money back anymore. I've heard that idea floated around. I've thought about it some. Do you think there's any merit to that? And the reason that I tie that in now is because in terms of student loan forgiveness, right? We just talked forgive the loans. You work in an inner city or underprivileged school, you get some of your loans forgiven. From that idea, I would say, I don't know, maybe that there's a different solution. Not saying yours is wrong or a
Mhm.
bad one, but is there any merit to that idea?
So say again, so you're saying that these loans, I mean, yes, a federal student loan, I'm not quite
The
I
the
understand the
price,
connection to the bankruptcy and how that would
so
affect the
the price
pricing.
of university, if I go get a loan and the school knows that the government is going to
Right,
insure
right,
the loan, then
right.
they
I see
can
what you're
have the
saying.
price go up and then the kids are in higher debt, but the school doesn't care because they'll get the money from the government anyways.
Okay, I'm following you. I think actually you're kind of touching into another part of my world is I think I mentioned at the beginning I've been in higher education advocacy for
Mm-hmm.
a long time. And most of my focus in that world has been around university research programs funded by the federal government. For example, medical research funded by the National Institutes of Health. Um, that's been my world for about 30 years.
Yeah.
The other side of federal funding of colleges and universities is what you're talking about is, student loans and Pell Grants and that whole,
FSFA.
yeah. So that's yes. So as I hear what you're saying, um, so you're getting at the issue of I don't know if I quite agree with the premise, if I'm understanding it, that
Mm-hmm.
because colleges and universities can give out these loans and know that they're backed by the federal government, that they're are you saying they're going to keep their prices
The pri
artificially high?
Yes, they are allowed to be artificially high in part, maybe not completely due to that, but at least in part due to that.
Yeah. I don't know if I quite agree with that premise because again, I know this world a little bit and I know
Yeah, yeah.
the cost of college education. There is no doubt cost of college education has gone leaps and bounds. Um, the one thing that, it's kind of my economics cap. One thing when you look at colleges and universities, at least the traditional bricks and mortar um, college experience, it's very labor intensive,
Mm-hmm.
which means, there's never, where in other industries we see, packaging and delivery, we can order a book um, from Amazon and that whole delivery system of goods has been automized so much that I think there's savings to the consumer. I think because colleges and universities are so labor intensive, they haven't had the same kind of benefit of technology to drive their prices down. Uh, so I don't think they're keeping their prices artificially high. I think the cost of an education is just that. It's expensive. I don't think there's any profit, being loaded into it. I just think, from what I've experienced in my world, the cost of running a university campus is really expensive. And even look at, things like we kids today demand like the field house and the athletic facilities and the really high tech dorms. When I went to college, my dorm was just like it's probably the size of the room I'm in right now.
Yeah,
But
it's a desk and a bunk bed and like maybe some outlets and that's it.
yeah. So I do think to some extent the demand for like, again, like the great student center and a better meal plan and, all this stuff contributes to the cost of education just being rising so much quicker than other sectors of our economy. So to get back to the question, I don't know if your premises of student loans were not so readily available, maybe
No,
and
not if they weren't available, but if they weren't all insured by the federal government.
yeah,
You can still take a loan
yeah,
out. There's no
yeah,
problem with that, but
yeah.
it's yeah.
I don't know if I like I said, I don't know if that would, what, put it this way, I would be interested in looking into that more if that actually had an impact on the cost of education. Um, and then I'm not convinced it would, but I'm an open book, and I want to be, uh, I want to be talking to the experts and the economists when it comes to issues like that. So I can't. That'll have to be my answer on that one for now.
Yeah, fair
I'm not
enough.
I'm not convinced that that's the solution. I actually look at it, again, that back, because we're tying it back to improving our public schools in our in our some of our inner cities and some of the schools that are most under resourced. And I would still say, get the best teachers, get the best administrators into those schools. And I would, I think that's, call it a domestic Peace Corps, so to say, where, you're going into areas that have a need, and, you're um, making a difference. And I think that could have some potential.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, let's jump to we'll jump to like the safe streets portion of your um or umbrella, I guess. What are your thoughts there? I think obviously this is in Paris, but Paris Olympics started. There's been three like teams that have been robbed already. We've seen a rise in crime generally over the past couple of years. I think that also ties into the affordable housing, right? If people don't have places to live or they can't afford food or whatever, right? Then that definitely can be a contributing factor to that. But what other things drew your attention to this? Why is it one of your big issues, and what sorts of solutions or ideas do you have to help with this sort of situation as well?
I think there's a few responses. I think one of the reasons it drew me in, and again, I don't want it to be about my platform. It's kind of, I think a platform always starts in, instinctively what you sense are the issues of your community.
Hmm.
And then I think it needs to be verified by talking to people. And again, I've spoken to thousands and thousands, just having to knock on doors and get signatures. And now in this next phase of my campaign, just trying to talk to people. Um, Also paying attention to the local news. I think the local news is, again, like I said earlier, I don't want to hear, granted, local news is loaded with, always leads with crime, and that might be a little bit, that might not be representative. It may or may not. I mean, but it does always, local news does lead with crime. But I think people are concerned. And I think when you hear, I mean, we have car theft rampant. We have, and I follow a lot on Nextdoor and the conversations on the Nextdoor app. Um, the big box stores, and just the um, theft in those stores, and people witnessing this. The thing that I think is really scary is when you hear carjackings. So I think I would say, just even personally, I pay attention more than I probably did 5 or 10 years ago to things like carjacking. I had a friend who, and he made a, it's his blunder, but he left his car. He goes into the same coffee store every day. Sometime, and this one day he was in a rush, so he left his car running and his car got stolen. I have another friend who was they were going out for the evening and they had to run into a drugstore real quick. And so my friend uh, ran in and said, "Hey, Sue, just lock the doors while I run in." And sure enough, my friend Sam ran into the store. Sue was in the car, and while Sam was in the store, someone started pounding on the window. And if she hadn't had the doors locked, someone would have come in there and, probably tried to take the car. I mean, and I just think we see, I just think that people, there is, I think that's just become more of a norm. The next door conversations I've been part of, some people that's their conclusion. That's the world we live in. People are going to walk into a store and take merchandise and it's not even well hidden. The store policy is they instruct their employees not to go after that. It's theft has become a norm. So when I look at all that, that's not acceptable, number one. What do we do about it? Number two, if it's not acceptable, what do we do about it? And I think when you start talking about crime, you got to just tie it to poverty. I think there's a direct line between crime and poverty. And so addressing crime and talking about safe streets to me comes back to not the extremes. And this is again where I think the parties get us in a bad space. Lock them up. That's one approach. The other approach, defund the police. I mean, these are like two extremes that really neither one is where I think we need to go. And so to me, it comes back to probably two things. One, youth opportunities, at-risk youth, just because a lot of the crime is teens and early 20s. And a lot of times it's just that's a choice that, again, in my understanding, ties directly to poverty and circumstances. So I think that at-risk youth and just intervention programs, mentor programs. I was a big brother in a mentor program about 15 years ago. I mean, I think these are really good programs. And I think that's again where federal funding can be part of the solution. I think funding these types of programs, funding anti-poverty type programs, we just need to be doing it. And it actually comes back to the discussion of schools. We got to get kids when they're young. So we just can't shortchange that role. And I think that is a role of the federal government. And then it's also then partnerships and solutions, people having the right people in the room. And I think the right people in the room are the police and the criminal justice system, the parents, the nonprofits who do this type of work, the schools, and I think the faith community as well. And it's again, it just can't be an attitude of, well, theft has become a norm, and you know what, we're just going to kind of turn our back to it. And there is that attitude. Again, I see it. I see it in this, again, in this next door app, which, you get people, some people are off the wall, but most people are just, sharing their thoughts and a really thoughtful perspective on what they're seeing. And I just, yeah, that's how I that's how Safe Streets became important to me. And again, I think my experience says you got to connect it to opportunities for youth.
Yeah. I want to there's two more things for sure I want to touch on. The first one is, so let's say we'll say when you win. When you win,
All
you
right.
have to go to DC, and there will be lots of people from lots of different districts and counties from around the country, all advocating for, hopefully, you would hope, similar things to what you're advocating for: safe streets, better schools, et cetera, for their local communities. There's a limited uh, federal budget, especially given the fact that our national debt is what it is. Um, what are your thoughts on bill comes across your desk and you want to advocate for $50 million for whatever for your district, and in that bill there's a gazillion dollars to some conflict halfway around the world. There's another $50 million to, like, how do you plan to balance that out in terms of, well, I got the money for my district, but for us as a country, right? Because you're going to
Yeah.
a national position. How have you thought about that? What are your thoughts on that
Yeah.
so far? Like, if, and we don't have to go super deep into kind of foreign policy really, but that surely is something that you would have thought at least a little bit about.
Yeah. I I'm gonna call that a I think that's gonna be, I want to say, a good problem, because it means I'm going to have to really dig into it because I'm in the office. Now, if I am in the office and yes, that's a reality. That is something to be confronted. I would say that, how would I start this?
I guess to put it
It's,
succinctly, are you
I know,
prepared to vote no on a bill that would give something to your constituents for the betterment of the country, in your opinion? I guess to put it as, like, very bluntly.
yeah,
But what are your thoughts on that situation generally, and
yeah.
how would you balance the two?
Well, I mean, we hear it in the news all the time. I mean, the poison pills, I guess is what they call it
Mm-hmm.
sometimes.
Yep.
There's something, that there's a bill that I or any representative really supports, but there's a poison pill in there that says I can't vote for the bill because of that poison pill. I think that's a reality of the Congress, and that's something that I'm not going to change. I mean, I'm going to be a freshman representative, and I'm going to be learning a ton on the fly. Um, if there's, though, I think, I guess, in one scenario, if there's that poison pill that's just unacceptable, I think you have to draw a line and say you can't vote for that particular bill. I just think that's, and poison pills are, again, I'm not on the Hill. I don't, but I think they're probably used regularly as a political weapon, and probably an effective weapon, I guess, in some situations. But I would say that, if the poison pill crosses a line that just I'm not comfortable with, and that my constituents wouldn't be comfortable with, I think then you have to say no to that particular scenario. I have when I think about, but I think that kind of is emblematic. Your scenario is emblematic of the problem with, and my concern about DNR, Democrats, Republicans, and these two major parties. We're always, in the House, there's going to be one party that's in control. And whatever party's in control sets the agenda. And that alone, to me, is a problem. And and this might be a little bit pie in the sky, probably a lot pie in the sky, and some would probably say naive. But one of the reasons what I would love to be is the only, I actually not, I would like to start a wave of independents who are elected into the House. I feel like if we had, you know, 50, let's say 50 out of the 435 members in the House, 50 who were independents, all of a sudden we would be, the starting point would actually be from the middle, and we would work out from there. Right now, what we're starting at is either the right or the left, and then something that often, you know, that might not be acceptable to the other side. So that's why we get into the do nothing Congresses, because you're just not going to get to consensus. It's a different incentive system. And I just feel like if we had, one independent, myself, in the House, might not make that much of a difference. But if we had 50 independents and we're able to work from the center, maybe some of the, stuff examples you're using, like the poison pill example, maybe all of a sudden that's not as common.
Yeah, I would hope not. Real quick hit question. Do you support term limits for Congress and senators and others, but generally
Yeah.
those?
I guess I think by virtue of me running as an independent and facing a 5-term incumbent who's done good things, but has no competition, to be honest. Hey, I'm going to be competitive, but 75%, there's probably a tendency to think, I don't really have to be, there's probably a tendency to think I'm going to be reelected. And I don't think that's a healthy situation. I think there needs to be competition. Um, and again, the way the parties are set up, it's really hard to, compete. One of the doors I knocked on the door of a young woman who she signed my petition, but it was just total fluke. She actually ran in the Democratic primary in I guess it was 2022, and ran against Don Beyer. And really, I met her quickly, but seemed really bright, really, passionate, but was really frustrated with the whole way that the primary played out, and just not getting support from the Democratic Party to be competitive against the incumbent. And so I guess to answer your question, yes, I would probably be I think there is something about being able to elect a representative. I want to elect the best person to represent me in the US Congress. And if I'm told after, I don't know, 4 terms or 5 terms, I don't know what the number is, that I can't vote for him or her anymore, I guess to some extent, maybe I feel disenfranchised. So I don't want to be so gung-ho about term limits. I think there is the downside of term limits is I might lose a representative that I really like and has done a good job. But I think the ups, you know what, no one's irreplaceable. And I think there are, hundreds of thousands of people in this congressional district, and I bet you there's thousands that would do an excellent job, that it would bring a fresh perspective. And as long as the incumbent wants to keep going, chances are there's not going to be any competition. So maybe we do need term limits.
You mentioned faith, and obviously you mentioned you just graduated from seminary a year ago. Um, I think the country generally seems more secular than in the past, although I recently it seems there's been some level of maybe resurgence in the last year or so. Um, we saw the assassination attempt on Trump, and he said something along the lines of like, "Thank God that I'm here," and it's becoming a bit more maybe I don't know if common is the right word, but it's more common for athletes to thank God in their post game interviews as of the last year or two. Um, what are your thoughts on faith as a country? And yeah, I guess I'll just leave it there.
Yeah,
What do you think about it?
really great question. Probably, you know, I do think that's what, like when you asked me at the beginning why I'm doing this, the program I studied at Wesley Theological Seminary was a program in public theology. And the way that I think the simplest way to describe that program was how to practice or demonstrate one's faith in the public square. And number one, I am totally, separation of church and state is a must have. I mean, this is a foundation of our country, so that should never be compromised. But bringing faith into the public square just means, to me, and if you're a Christian, if you're a Jesus follower, you're just, which I am, it just means compassion. It means um, welcoming the marginalized, the person who's homeless, who's unhoused. You know what? I and my I'll just share this. My son is a veteran from the Iraq War, and he and his buddies saw lots of crap in that war, and he still suffers from post-traumatic stress, and a lot of his buddies do as well. And those folks are marginalized. A lot of people are marginalized in this country, and I think Jesus's message is welcoming all, and in fact, welcoming first and foremost those who are marginalized. And that's that to me is not inconsistent with public service. It's not inconsistent with um, our principles as a nation. I think that's practicing faith in the public square, and that's how we need to express that. I think there's other ways that I think when we call ourselves a Christian country, I think that's a dangerous path in that that actually tends to then convolute state and church, and that's not again what we're founded on.
Yeah. Um, Last kind of question, I guess. What have you learned from the campaign so far? What have you learned from the processes? What have you learned from getting yourself on the ballot? What have you learned from talking to the people that you've knocked on their door? What are some of the things that you've learned over the course of your campaign so far?
I think people are they just want normal. I have so many people um, have encouraged me. I don't think I had one door slammed on my face. Not everybody wanted to talk to me, but everybody, I didn't meet one person along the whole way that I say, wow, that was what a jerk. I didn't meet people like that. And I think, a lot of the messaging I got was, they, and that's why I think, 50 independents in the US House could happen. And it would make such a difference. Um, people are, I've just people don't want to choose. There are hard people who are lifelong Democrats, lifelong Republicans, and that's just how they're going to define themselves. But I would say the vast majority of people I met, 70% would just say, you know what, I maybe I vote this way, but I don't have to vote this way. I want to vote for someone who's just normal, who's got a heart for this. And and that's why this kind of quality of life platform, I think, has been pretty effective. Again, will it propel me to the US Congress? I don't know. Maybe. But I think people really are open to an independent and an independent who just is focused on quality of life issues. And that's I think a big takeaway I've had, that people are very, very open to that. And I think the country's open to that. I think that's what the country wants, is just normal and not this constant choosing sides. I don't know, Eric, we all have, a circle of people in our lives. And there's always, the stereotype is the uncle who's like really crotchety and is, set in set in his ways. And, all of a sudden at the Thanksgiving table, you're like going at one another. And I don't think it's, if you're going to go at one another, go at one another over, sports or whatever. But, politics shouldn't be the dividing line. That shouldn't be what divides families. And we've all heard these stories of families who can't get together at Thanksgiving because of, again, the uncle or whatever that has some really offbeat political views.
Yeah. If for whatever reason, this doesn't work out for you, are you gonna plan to stay in kind of the try and continue with the public life in terms of serving, whether it's running for a different position, or are you, what's the thoughts on that for you?
I have said to people, this is like an internship, and my internship ends on November 5th, and I'm either going to be offered a job or I'm going to be out on the street. And you know what? If I'm out on the street, I'll deal with that when on November 6th.
Fair enough. That's a good answer. I think that's a great place to wrap up. Um, if you had to do a kind of 30-second, I know we talked about why people should vote for you earlier, but this will give me a good opportunity to clip it and send it to you. But why should people vote for you? The elevator pitch,
Yeah.
floor is yours.
Yeah, I would just say to voters in Congressional District 8 that um, we are people of compassion, and we are people of love neighbor, respect differences, and challenge bullies. And an independent who has those values can make a huge difference in the US Congress. And um, we don't need to be divided. We don't need to have to choose sides. And I would represent all people of all stripes and would welcome everyone uh, to be part of this, let's call it this independent movement.
Very nice. And where can the people find you if they're interested in learning more or donating or supporting? Where should they go?
Yeah, just go to davekennedy2024.com, and that's my website. And there's a donate button. It doesn't get used that much, but uh, it's been used a few times. And um, my email's on there as well as dave@davekennedy2024.com. But yeah, go to the website, davekennedy2024.com.
Very nice. That link, for those listening, will be in the description, as always. And any last thoughts before we get you out of here?
No, I think what you're doing, Eric, is great. I just think I know you shared some of your story with me before we talked, and I think that's, it just again it's making a difference. And I think anything where you're talking to people and welcoming people, that's always a good thing. So thanks for what you've done by starting this platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you guys for listening. Thank you, Dave, for your time, and we will see you guys next time. Peace.
Bye, Ron. Thanks.